CNN, the most trusted name in news.
The American Civil Liberties Union has sent legal observers to monitor the Minuteman Project along our southern border. The ACLU says it's concerned about the potential for violence between the Minutemen and illegal aliens. My next guest is the executive director of the ACLU in Arizona. Eleanor Eisenberg is joining us tonight from Phoenix. Good to have you with us, Eleanor.
Good evening. Good to be here.
The media attention that the Minuteman Project has to surprise, I'm certain, all of the organizers and the volunteers themselves. Has it surprised you, and does just simply the media attention in any way allay any of your concerns?
Well, first let me clarify our position.
Sure.
The ACLU represents the Bill of Rights. I often say that's our only client. And so long as everybody there, counter-protesters, protesters, Minutemen, everybody who is gathering there has the right under the First Amendment.
Great heroes was Mother Teresa of Calcutta. It's amazing how these two figures have really shaped the century, we believe, as Roman Catholics. And Mother Teresa would say something that I believe has spurred him on to the end. To live each day as if it were your first day, your last day, and your only day. And I believe, particularly Keith, after that assassination attempt on May the 13th back in the early 80s, that he believed that God had given him a certain time, and he was to use that time to the full. He's even giving a witness of that now, Keith, in these last moments of his life. His bed of pain is one of the greatest pulpits he's ever preached from. He's giving us hope on how to suffer and on how to die graciously.
Father Anthony Figueredo of Seton Hall University, the personal assistant to John Paul at meetings of the bishops from 1996 to 2001. We thank you, and we will be talking with you again, no doubt, within the hour.
Thank you, Keith.
The presumed final journey of Pope John Paul II resonating at this hour in the birthplace of Christianity. NBC's Martin Fletcher joining us now from Jerusalem. Good morning to you, Martin.
Hi, Keith. Well, here it's the middle of the night, of course, but people are still Christians. Some Christians in the street have gone to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre here in Jerusalem. So behind me, by the way, you can't see it in the darkness, of course, but the people went there to pray. It turned out that the doors to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre were closed, in fact, and so they were not able.
Ask your doctor about Allegra D12 Hour. You need to know about it.
No one ever woke up one morning and said, I just want to be an ordinary musician.
Here? Yeah, a week on strike has had its effect on business. Why are you doing that, Sophia? It's a power move. The three of us against one of him, and I get to look down on him.
Ma, Mr. McCracken's here.
Well, ladies, let's get down to business. I've got to get back to the chow wagon for the lunch rush.
Yeah, we'll just leave you to your negotiations.
Before we go, can we get you some milk or some double-stuffed Oreos?
No, thank you, ma'am.
Boy, he's tough.
Have a seat, boys.
Look, I've read and reread your list of demands.
Wait, McCracken. Before you begin, I want to tell you something. I'm no novice when it comes to major negotiations.
Oh, really?
Let me tell you a story. Picture it. Sicily, 1922. An attractive peasant girl who has saved her lira embarks on a glorious vacation to a Crimean resort on the Black Sea. For weeks, she frolics at this seaside resort and enjoys the company of many young men, all of whom adore her.
All of them?
Shut up, and I work alone. All of them. When it's time to return to Sicily, 3 different suitors beg her to stay. But she can't decide who to choose, so she chooses none of them. But she agrees to meet with them at the same resort many years later. To her trio of suitors, that eventful gathering was referred to as Rendezvous with Sophia. But to the rest of the world, it was better known as the Yalta Conference.
You expect me to buy that? Look, the only reason I came over here was so you wouldn't cause a scene at the chow wagon when I fired you.
Fired us?
You heard me. And no story you could tell is going to change my mind.
Not even the one we could tell your father about how his car got dented while you were doing wheelies and not while it was sitting in the parking lot?
You wouldn't do that, would you?
Hey, she's your grandmother. Has she ever lied to you?
When a teenage girl is responsible...
1 week. And we had a very difficult time arranging interviews and finding people, frankly, who were willing to sit down in front of a television camera. Suddenly, the word came from on high. John Paul II would not only meet with the NBC crews, he would sit and talk with them and have a private mass for them in his private chapel. Suddenly, every door of the Vatican opened, and one of his key advisors said to me, the Pope believes very deeply, if it doesn't happen on television, it didn't happen.
To welcome the group from the American Television Network, NBC.
Tim, share with our audience that meeting that you had with him as you were making the arrangements for NBC to be there.
You know, Tom, I was led into a room about the size of a high school auditorium, empty but for myself, and suddenly there appeared in white the Pope. I am myself Catholic, and this tough, no-nonsense, hard-hitting moderator of Meet the Press walked up to the Pope and began his conversation by saying, "Bless me, Father." He laughed immediately and said, "They tell me you're a very important man from NBC, as he would say, NBC. And I said, "Your Holiness, with all respect, there's only two of us in this room, and I'm a very distant second." He laughed again, put his hands on my shoulders, looked me in the eye, and said, "Right." Later, Tom, in the week, I was up near his apartment, and I saw a little plaque that said, "Totus Tuus." I was very curious about that Latin expression. It translates "all yours" in English. And I was told that when he was shot, the assassination attempt, he thought he was dying. And he said to Mary, the Mother of God, "If I survive, totus tuus, I am all yours. I rededicate my life to you." And totus tuus became very much a motto for his papacy.
You used that motto to good effect when your son Luke was born as well, Tim.
When we went to Rome with the Today Show, my wife was pregnant, and the Pope blessed Maureen's womb. She speaks Italian, so the Pope began to speak to her in Italian. And then he spoke to his translator in Polish. And then he spoke to me in English. And then he spoke to a group of school children in Japanese. It was breathtaking. He has an ability to converse in 28 different languages. And he said, when the baby is born, bring your baby back to Rome, to the Vatican, and I will bless your baby. And so I had a special T-shirt made up, a white T-shirt with red lettering, Totus Tuus. And then we brought him back to Rome when Luke was just about a year old, and the Pope saw him in the front row, made a beeline for him, picked him up, hugged him, kissed him, looked at Totus Tuus and kept saying, "Very nice, very nice."
When he came to America, especially Denver, I was so struck by his rock star qualities for young Catholics. And I don't mean that in a secular sense, but what he did was renew, in many ways, the faith of young Catholics in this country in their church and what it stood for. In his appearances in the stadium, he was someone with whom they could identify, as opposed to those pontiffs from when I was growing up who always seemed so distant and just mystical.
Tom, I had no memory as a young Catholic boy in Buffalo as to the Pope. I knew Pope John Paul the 23rd, Vatican Council, but he was not real to me. He was some distant figure in the Vatican in Rome. Suddenly, this Polish Pope who came to America, young, vibrant, young people couldn't stop cheering and saluting and praying with him. And I remember they kept calling him out for one more time for them to say something to him. And he finally looked across this huge crowd and said, "The Pope must sleep." And it was such a wonderful human statement. I'm tired. I have to get some rest here. But that kind of connection truly existed.
Tom Brokaw and Tim Russert tonight, who, along with many of the rest of us here at NBC News, spent a good portion of this day thinking back on the earth-changing events of the last 26 years and the lasting impact on this world left behind by Pope John Paul II. All eyes are on the Vatican tonight. Stay with this NBC station and MSNBC on cable for hour-by-hour coverage as all of this unfolds. That, for now, is our broadcast for this Friday night, the first day of April 2005. I'm Brian Williams, reporting from New York tonight. I hope to see you right back here tomorrow night for NBC Nightly News. Don't forget Dateline tonight at 8, 7 Central. NBC News coverage continues, of course, through the weekend. Good night.
Nightly News is a presentation of NBC News. More Americans watch NBC News than any other news organization in the world.
Tonight, on an all-new Law & Order trial by jury. I was unfaithful. A famous...
For tonight, thunderstorms likely. Low 47. Winds southeast at 20 to 30 miles per hour. Chance of rain 80%. And on Saturday, thunderstorms likely. A few storms may be severe. High 64. Winds south-southwest at 20 to 30 miles per hour. Chance of rain 90%. And Saturday night, thunderstorms ending early. Windy, low 44. Winds west-southwest at 25 to 35 miles per hour. Chance of rain 60%. Your week ahead.
O'clock Roman time approaches.
Once he was the ultimate outsider, the second choice, to whom the chair of St. Peter came only after the lingering death of one venerable pope and the sudden passing of another only 33 days in the Vatican, whose election was not just unlikely, but inconceivable. The last time a non-Italian had become the vicar of Christ, Michelangelo's ceiling of the Sistine Chapel had been complete for only 2 decades. Yet, for 26½ years, longer than all those who preceded him, save Pius V and Peter himself, he became not just the leader of the world's Catholics, but its spirit in a time of near total transition. Survivor of an assassin's bullet, tireless traveler, God's athlete, author and poet, politician in papal vestments who helped liberate his native country and who parlayed with countries foreign to him and even foreign to his church. A life fully led as Pope of 1,070,000,000 Catholics worldwide. A life taken in whole, as varied and as fulfilling and as full of wonder as could be imagined. A life after years of decline and 2 months of constant sickness, that is tonight, by all indications, nearing an end. This is MSNBC's continuing coverage of the illness of Karol Wojtyła, the illness of Pope John Paul II.
2 minutes after 2 o'clock in the morning in Rome, and yet 70,000 or perhaps more people still fill St. Peter's Square, waiting for some news of the health of Karol Wojtyła, Pope John Paul II, for the 26th year, waiting to find out if he will live, continue to live for a while, perhaps in the wildest dreams recover, or if this is to be the final chapter in his extraordinary story. I'm Keith Olbermann of MSNBC at MSNBC headquarters. Let's go to Rome. NBC's Keith Miller, who has covered so much of this papacy, is near the Vatican covering what may be its approaching end. Keith, good morning.
Good morning, Keith. I should say good evening to you there. Still thousands of people here in St. Peter's Square, some of them singing for their Pope, others praying, many of them holding a silent vigil for their Pope. For people all over the world, it was a day of sorrow, sadness, and tears, as all of the medical bulletins coming out of the Vatican revealed John Paul II was losing his grip on life. From the Vatican, word that his blood pressure had fallen dangerously low, his kidneys failing, barely able to breathe. The Pope was informed that his condition was terminal. He chose not to return to the hospital.
Il Papa lucido.
The Pope's chief spokesman, near tears, said he had never seen the pontiff like this in 26 years. The bad news traveled fast and far. From the Pope's native Poland, his hometown Krakow, to the Philippines, to the holy city of Jerusalem. At the White House, they followed the news of the Pope's declining health closely.
President and Mrs. Bush joined people all around the world who are praying for the Holy Father.
Tens of thousands of the faithful descended on the Vatican to be near the Pope in his hours of need. But as the day progressed, the news only got worse. Quote, the general conditions of the Holy Father have further worsened. They have seen their religious leader hospitalized twice in the past 2 months, but today they seem to realize that their Pope was close to the end. Tonight, an unscheduled recital of the Rosary, inspired by the light still glowing in the papal apartment. A Vatican official said the Pope had been, quote, lucid, fully conscious, and extraordinarily serene. And at times, as rumors of the Pope's death circulated, the crowds here fell silent. A silence felt round the world. The lights in the papal apartment still glowing bright tonight, Keith, with the Pope being attended to by his doctors, surrounded by his aides and the people who love him, and just about everybody awaiting some sort of word on what his medical condition is. Keith?
Keith Miller in Rome, let me ask you for your assessment. I don't mean to force anyone into a prognostication, but I'd like to take advantage of your many years covering this papacy and the transparency with which the Pope's health has been addressed in the last 2 months especially. Do you think that were he to pass away in these overnight hours in Rome, that the announcement would be made in the middle of the night, even if there are 70,000 people in the square, or would, for the symbolism simply that would ensue, would it be held out? Would this information be kept from the public until at least sunrise?
My speculation, and it's only that, Keith, is that the news would in fact be held back, principally because there are some ceremonies that must be conducted. There are some formalities within the Vatican that must be observed. For instance, the Chamberlain here has to certify the death. The cardinals have to be called. There are world leaders who must be informed first before the general announcement. Also, as you mentioned, it's just a bit past 2 in the morning here. The numbers within the square have dwindled, some still thousands of people here. But I would suspect we wouldn't hear about the death of the Pope until sunlight. All that being said, because of the transparency that we've had from the Vatican in the past 24 hours, it is now leaking like a sieve, and there is the danger, of course, that John Paul could pass away in the middle of the night and somebody would leak that information. So they could be forced to say what has happened, even though they may want to wait.
And when leaked information suggested just that 5 or 6 hours ago, the Vatican was quick to deny it, and that transparency that we both talked about has truly been in place. So we'll see. There are 2 competing forces here, indeed. Keith Miller at Vatican City with the latest on the Pope's condition and the prospects of us finding out more about it. Great thanks. We'll be checking back with you shortly. Thank you. Let's bring Carl Bernstein back in, the author of His Holiness John Paul II and the Hidden History of Our Time, and of course the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter and author. Carl, let me get your opinion first off on this question that I just asked Keith Miller and asked Jim Maceda earlier. With this media-savvy Pope, with this Pope who reportedly was once asked in the last couple of years by an associate, how is your health, Holy Father? And he was supposed to have answered without missing a beat, I don't know, I haven't read the papers yet. What would his instructions be? Would there in fact be instructions from him about when to make this announcement public, when the announcement needs to be made?
I don't know, quite honestly. His assistant for matters of the press is an immensely powerful man, probably the most powerful layman in the Catholic Church, Joaquin Navarro Valles. He'll be managing the announcement with the Secretary of State of the Vatican and with the Pope's personal secretary, who's been his personal secretary for so long, Archbishop Jivish. I think there obviously is a preference to wait until daybreak if indeed the Pope has died or if he dies during the night. But as you say, it might not be possible, but I think they would certainly try to make that possible if they could do it.
I mentioned this, and we heard it said in a couple of other places that it is impossible, certainly for anyone under the age of 25, probably under the age of 30, maybe even under the age of 35, including the most ardent and faithful of Catholics, to envision anyone else as Pope. Can you in any way, for the benefit of those particularly, recreate the extraordinary unlikelihood in 1978 that this, of all men, would become Pope and then become the third longest serving one?
It's an if history question. You never know what's going to happen with history, and this is certainly one of those examples. And there was very little suggestion, except among those inside the conclave that elected him, that he would be elected. It took several ballots before he pulled in front of the other candidates. Interestingly enough, the American church had a lot to do with his election. He was very close to Cardinal Kroll of Philadelphia, a Polish American, and Cardinal Kroll lobbied very effectively for Votila's election. But the idea of a non-Italian pope was a very radical one, and the idea of a pope who would challenge the Soviet Empire as no pope, you know, the Catholic Church had been locked in struggle with the communists since the time of Lenin. And yet to have a communist a pope from a communist country who with great subtlety engaged, unlike his predecessors, the Soviet Empire, was unthinkable. You know, he is a leader like all great leaders, a man of great mystery. And a lot of what he did in mysterious ways. And one of those things is that we look at him now almost as if no controversy existed about him. Well, of course, there's Pat Buchanan, who grew up in a parish across town from where I did in Washington, and I, of course, come from a different faith, but I grew up in a St. Anne's parish in Washington, that if you remember...
Too important for partisan games.
Say your prize stallion has a hot date with that special someone, but he's not looking his best right now. Out here, it takes more than a good bloodline to make a horse look good. You have that trailer home by midnight now.
Budweiser.
Miller Lite.
Oh. Bud Light?
Miller Lite.
Yeah, all right. Oh. All right. Budweiser Select?
Miller Lite.
They can try all they want, but there's nothing quite like a great-tasting, less-filling Miller Lite. Now America's fastest-growing beer. Miller. Good call.
Thomas Jefferson. His legacy includes the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark Expedition. The Westward Journey Nickel series from the United States Mint commemorates the bicentennials of these events with a new likeness of Thomas Jefferson on the 2005 nickel, plus 2 new historic tail designs. The nickels are included in beautifully crafted proof sets, a great gift idea for any occasion. To order, call 1-800-USA-MINT or visit www.usmint.gov.
And that is a live picture at about 2:26 a.m. in Vatican City. We welcome viewers here in America as well as viewers around the world on CNN International right now. A great many people still keeping their vigil outside St. Peter's in Vatican City, as you can see there, as they have really all throughout the day and probably all through this night. We turn again to CNN senior international correspondent Christiane Amanpour, who is in Rome for the latest. Christiane, what's going on?
Well, it's very much the same in terms of what we know absolutely and exactly about the Pope's condition. As I said, we have not had a formal medical bulletin from the Vatican for many hours now, and the last one simply stated that his organs were failing, that his breathing was shallow and his blood pressure unstable, and that he was serenely surrendering to the Almighty. And really, the people here do believe that this is the end, and thousands of people have come to Vatican Square to say goodbye to the man they call the the Holy Father. And people who have come here in huge crowds, you would imagine there to be a loud sort of noise, as would be probably in many, many big crowds, but instead it's silent, it's very somber, quiet, respectful, sad, people saying goodbye. I saw many couples holding each other, holding hands, bowing their heads, some people in tears. People brought their children, people brought old and infirm relatives in wheelchairs. There were Americans that I spoke to, Italians, there were Poles here. Pope John Paul is Polish, and many people from many parts of the world who are not just here because they're the Catholic faithful, but others who are here on business or on holiday or for other reasons and realize that this is something momentous, have come here to St. Peter's Square.
Christiane, it is 2:30 in the morning there. If something happens to the Pope in these next few hours, will there be an announcement, or is that something that would be delayed until tomorrow morning?
Do you know, I expect that there would be an announcement, but I can't be sure about that. We don't know. We haven't been told when they will give us the final bulletin, if you like. There is quite a procedure that takes place after the Pope dies. First of all, his name is called by one of the cardinals 3 times. The seals are broken, his apartment is sealed, and then it's announced to the public. So, you know, this is a very traditional ritual. It's been in place for hundreds of years, and it's obviously been seriously under consideration and planning for this Pope, who's been so ill for so long, and of course over the last 3 days whose health has deteriorated so rapidly.
And so many people just want to be there, just want to be near the Pontiff in these last few difficult hours. Christiane Amanpour, thank you very much for that. We'll talk with you a little bit later on. The Pope dedicated himself to the task of bringing people together, and certainly he did see that as his great mission. Still in all, he very often had precisely the opposite effect, taking positions that many other people strongly disagreed with. Heidi Collins now looks at the many sides of Pope John Paul II.
Some have called Pope John Paul II a controversial figure, but profoundly contradictory may be a better description.
Social organization exists only for the service of man and for the protection of his dignity, and that it cannot claim to serve the common good when human rights are not safeguarded.
Politically, the Pope has been very much a modern man, a man famously in favor of freedom. The pontiff from once communist Poland, who heroically stood against communism all over the world.
And he thought once the yoke was removed of communism, that there would be a great spiritual revival which would spill over into the West. That was his dream, but that certainly has not worked.
On the other hand, where doctrine was concerned, he has not been modern at all. An unwavering traditionalist, a rejecter of reform, a pope who held the line.
Particularly the sort of issues of sexual morality that tend to be very important in the developed West, whether it's abortion or birth control or gay rights or the role of women, where the Pope's vision has not won a broad popular following.
Pope John Paul II held the line on the place of women in the church, rejecting appeals, heard with particular fervor in the U.S., for the ordination of women.
Your God is king.
It's a matter of justice. It's a matter of inclusion. And we can use all the rhetoric we like to try to kid ourselves that women are equal in this church, but they'll never be equal until they can be ordained.
He held the line on divorce. The church continues to be unalterably against it. He held the line on abortion, legalized extermination, he once called it, and on birth control.
Only a higher moral vision can motivate the choice for life.
He held the line on the assimilation of openly gay and lesbian men and women into the clergy and against same-sex marriage. In his recent book, Memory and Identity, he wrote that homosexuality was part of an ideology of evil which insidiously threatens society.
When he came to power, when he was elected, he realized that one thing that he had to do was to restore clarity to Catholic teaching. And he says, okay, maybe they won't obey, maybe they don't accept, but at least they'll know what the church stands for.
He seems to have adopted the position of the philosophers and theologians from about the 13th century.
In the end, Pope John Paul II, controversial, a man of opposites, an anti-communist freedom fighter, and an unbending defender of the faith, a man of the future and of the past. Heidi Collins, CNN, New York.
Well, it's some of those traditional values that has often brought this Pope at odds with some Catholics here in the United States. Still, John Paul had a very special relationship with the people of this country. He visited the United States during the first year of his papacy and continued to return, making 7 trips here in all. The only country that got more visits was his home, Poland. Joining me to talk about this Pope's relationship with American Catholics and Catholics around the world is the Reverend Joseph Katersky, chair of the Department of Philosophy at Fordham University. He's an avid student of Pope John Paul II. We appreciate you being with us.
Delighted to be here tonight.
This Pope's relationship with the United States, I mean, visiting here 7 times, what was the relationship like, and why did he come here so often?
I think he wanted to come to what he called the capital of the world.
That's what he called the United States.
He called New York especially, and he did so mindful that so many important trends are set here, so many important businesses and economic concerns and thoughts are thought here. And he wanted to come to the United Nations, and so his 2 visits to the United Nations, trying to plead for peace and plead for the message of Christ before all the nations of the world, extremely important.
His legacy, I mean, there's so many different facets to it. Obviously, so much has been said about his fight against communism, the influence he had on the Solidarity movement in Poland. As you look at his legacy, what do you take away?
There's an intellectual legacy as well as a legacy on the stage of world history, and there's something important for the church.
How do you mean an intellectual legacy?
He was a great writer and a philosopher. I'd be willing to bet you a beer that if we meet 100 years from now...
Are you allowed to bet me a beer?
I'm allowed to bet you a beer.
Okay.
And if we could do that 100 years from now, one of the books they're still going to be talking about is his encyclical Veritatis Splendor, the splendor of the truth. In that, not only does he do wonderful things with the scriptures, but he, in the 2nd chapter, undertakes a criticism of 4 of the really important ideas that are afloat in ethics today. And he's got his own take on it. I like to think about it sort of as a good cholesterol, bad cholesterol approach. He identifies what's wrong with the way these concepts are used, and then he proposes his own way of using them better.
And in his suffering, I mean, his suffering was very public, and I mean, that fits into his writings about suffering.
He wrote about that too. His 1987 letter on the Christian meaning of human suffering is a sleeper. And when it's discovered, I think it will be both personally edifying as well as intellectually challenging for a whole generation of intellectuals.
You know, when you look at polls of how American Catholics viewed this Pope, more than 60% say they like what he was doing. About 1/3, though, said that they might have some problems. I actually think we have a poll we can put up. About 1/3 said he was too conservative, and 2% said 33% too conservative, 2% too liberal, 62% about right. Was his job here, did he see part of his role as clarifying the teachings of the church here?
Definitely, and constantly taking us back to the fact that conservative or liberal, we all have to conform our minds and our understandings to the heart of Christ. If we're more conservative than Christ is, then we better get with Christ. If we're more liberal than Christ is, we had better get on his page. And I think what he called us back to again and again as Catholics was to try to understand the mind of our Lord.
Well, it's certainly a sad night for people around the world, but also a night to celebrate the life of this man.
I find myself very thankful for the 26 years of his leadership.
So for you, it's not so much, I mean, there's sadness, but there's also joy.
There is, but there's sadness, but there's also just much gratitude.
All right. Father, thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate it. Nice to meet you. Well, coming up next on this special edition of 360, the Pope and Islam and Judaism and the world's religions, how he reached out to so many other faiths. Also a little later tonight, we'll look at what will happen in these next few hours and in these days to come when the Pope finishes his journey. Stay with us.
Samsonite spinners. 4 wheels, 0 effort. Samsonite. Travel made easy.
Wealth management at UBS.
lending solutions for your borrowing needs. A financial advisor to customize a plan for you. You and us. UBS.
Well, we've come to the nation's capital, here to try to find the most powerful person in the country. Do you know who that might be?
Down the street.
You guys ever play the Ping G2? You're the most powerful man in Washington. You want to try it?
Get it longer, straighter, make you a better driver, make you a better golfer.
Great shot.
Man, that's wonderful.
The new Ping G2, 460 cc's of power and forgiveness.
Worst things to do on the lunch hour, isn't there? Absolutely. All right, take care.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are.
Even with good credit, getting a home loan can be a long process. But at eLoan, you apply in just minutes, either online or over the phone. There's a lot less paperwork, and you get a loan decision fast. It's lending the way it was meant to be. Apply now at eLoan.com.
Vergine degna di lode,
prega per noi.
Vergine potente,
prega per noi.
Vergine clemente,
prega per noi.
Vergine fedele,
prega per noi.
Specchio di perfezione.
Some of the sights and the sounds of the Vatican from earlier today, a scene we have been watching all throughout this day and continue to watch very closely as we monitor these last difficult hours as the Pope's journey comes to an end. Earlier today, worshipers said the rosary. They prayed for Pope John Paul II, and they are doing that right now here at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, and doing that at the Vatican at St. Peter's, of course. Pope John Paul will be remembered in so many different ways, in part for doing things that really no other pope had done before. Nearly 4 years ago, he tried to bridge the gap between Christians and Muslims by becoming the first pontiff to enter a mosque. He also was the first pontiff to enter a synagogue. But after John Paul departs, the next pope might encounter even more challenges as he deals with a growing Muslim faith. CNN senior international.
It's nice to have...
Beg pardon?
It's funny. In my dreams, Al never has any feet. Oh, well. Go on.
Well, in my dream, Steve came in and he asked me if I wanted to fool around. And when I said yes, he turned and it was Al.
My Al? Well, then what happened?
Nothing.
Yep. Sounds like my Al.
I hope you're not upset, Peggy.
Oh, about a dream? Don't be silly. Plus, if you dreamed that Al was in your bedroom, I should be apologizing to you.
Thanks, Peggy. Oh, but could you do me a favor? Please, don't tell Al about this.
Oh, don't worry. But could you do something for me?
What?
If you ever dream about Al again, could you check and see if he has any feet? It really bothers me.
Sure thing.
Hi, Mice. Hi, Peg.
Bye, Peggy. Al.
What's with her?
She had a dream she slept with you last night.
Oh, yeah. She's a lucky gal.
Marcy, I'm home.
Steve?
Yeah. Sorry I'm late, honey. The pro-penny people pelted us with nickels. Did I wake you?
Steve, it is you.
But those that have remained are holding on to hope that perhaps the next announcement we get from the Vatican will not be bad news. We don't know a whole lot about the Pope's condition at this hour. The last transmission of any information came about 8 hours ago. But we want to focus now on one of the legacies of Pope John Paul's, the papacy. He has spent much of his time working to bring people closer together regardless of their politics or faith. And there's one man whose friendship with the Pope goes way back to childhood, an unlikely childhood. And he says that quality would shape the Pope's efforts to mend the rift between two of the world's religions.
Wadowice, Poland, where young boys still line up to learn to be altar boys and become initiated in the ways of the Catholic Church, where two boys named Jurek and Lolek grew up, went to school together, and became friends.
He was a nice boy which I played with, and went to school together. I lived very near. And Wojtyła is here, and I am here.
Jurek Jerzy Kluger talking about Lolek, Karol Wojtyła, the boy who would one day become Pope.
Soccer, that was our main sport. He was a goalkeeper. I was inside left.
They played and they studied at this public school. Not an unusual friendship in Poland at a time between the two world wars. Except while Lolek was Catholic, Jurek was Jewish. So was about a quarter of Wadowice's population in those days.
I didn't discuss very much politics with him in those days. But certainly he was not an anti-Semite. Nothing like that. Neither was his father.
Kluger says Wadowice was different from the rest of Poland, which was rife with anti-Semitism. Here, Catholic and Jews could and did live together in peace. He remembers how when a famous Jewish cantor came to sing at the synagogue there, many Catholics wanted to attend, including his friend Wojtyła and Wojtyła's father.
And I remember exactly as I walked in, because we were still outside the synagogue.
Just as memorable was Kluger's visit to the church, where his friend was altar boy. He rushed in one day during Mass, anxious to tell Lolek about his examination results.
And the Mass finished, and a woman came to me, say, you're the young Kluger, the son of Dr. Kluger. I said, yes. So what are you doing here? I said, yeah, I'm waiting for a friend of mine. So she made such a face, went off.
The young Wojtyła was troubled by the woman's behavior toward his friend. Kluger remembers what he said.
And we're the children of the same God. They never will understand that. And he was 10 years old.
But the world around them was changing. In neighboring Germany, the Nazis came to power, and their corner of Poland would never be the same. The childhood friends would soon lose touch.
We felt far too safe in Wadowice. If we would have had this kind of preoccupying fear, we could have left.
After the Nazis invaded, Kluger and his father joined the Polish army, then eventually made their way to Britain. But his sister and mother were rounded up by the Nazis and sent to a concentration camp in the town of Auschwitz, just a few miles from Wadowice. They died there. Karol Wojtyła spent the war years in the nearby city of Krakow, where under Nazi occupation, he was studying to become a priest.
I got the information that he became a priest.
By the time Kluger and Wojtyła were reunited, it was the early 1960s. Wojtyła had not only become a priest, but at a very young age was already an archbishop. Kluger, who by now lived in Italy, heard that his old friend was in Rome, making a speech, so he arranged a meeting.
At that time, I never thought that he would become a pope.
But in 1978, after Pope John Paul I died suddenly, his friend returned to Rome. This time, Karol Wojtyła, Lolek to his friend, was elected pope, choosing the name John Paul II.
When I was at the dentist, we heard the news. I mean, the whole world knows that scene. I won't describe it now anymore.
Jerzy Kluger and his wife would have the first audience with the new pope. But the story doesn't end there, because Jerzy Kluger became an unofficial bridge between the Vatican and the Jews.
You know, I never pretended I have any political sort of diplomatic inspirations or anything.
Kluger helped convince his friend, the Pope, to make an unprecedented visit to Rome's main synagogue. 7 years after making an emotional trip to Auschwitz.
Wojtyła grew with the Jews, went to school with the Jews. So he knew, and he was there, a witness to the Holocaust. He's seen it all, what was happening.
Pope John Paul II's journeys would also take him to Israel, and his childhood friend would be there with him, forging a new relationship between Catholics and Jews.
Obviously he changed, he grown up, you know, and became older, and with all this high office. But the character is still the same. He's a man of justice.
And their friendship had yet another twist. After the war, Jerzy Kluger married a Catholic, and the Pope would become something of the family priest, baptizing and marrying members of the Kluger clan. The Pope also made an extraordinary effort to reach out to Jews all over the world, and in 1998, he issued a formal apology for the Church's failure to do more to stop the Holocaust. And joining me now from Los Angeles is Rabbi Marvin Hier, founder of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, who has met with the Pope on a number of occasions. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, sir.
It's a pleasure.
Given the fundamental differences Christians and Jews have about Jesus Christ, how is it, do you think, Pope John Paul II was able to move beyond his own set of personal beliefs to embrace Jews?
Well, first, it's very interesting. Originally, the Church, for example, in the height of the Holocaust in 1943, the Vatican wrote the Roosevelt administration not to grant the Jewish homeland in Palestine. That was in 1943. Now, this Pope recognized the state of Israel. He said to himself, you know, the old Catholic teaching that if we recognize a Jewish state in Palestine, that means that the Jews did not suffer for their rejection of Christ. And he said, no. We have to recognize the world as it is. And theology is one thing, and we have a right to believe, Catholics believe in Jesus, and they believe in the resurrection. But this is a reality that there is a Jewish state in the Middle East, and the Catholic Church has two choices, either ignore it or recognize it. And John Paul II said, I'm going to recognize it, and I'm going to visit it as a guest of the State of Israel.
Where do you think Pope John Paul II's affection for Jews came from?
I think because he suffered with Jews during the Holocaust. When he was a slave laborer, when the Nazis forced him to work in the Salve metalworks in Poland, he saw firsthand what oppression, what persecution means. He never forgot that. And when he rose through the ranks and became the Pope, he said, I'm going to make a difference, and I'm not going to take the world down that road again. And that's why he went to Poland to stand with the Polish people against the Soviet Union. And I think a lot of it came from his shared experience with Jews as a victim of Nazism.
And a final reflection on perhaps one of your fondest memories of the time you have spent with the Pope.
I would just say that, you know, we presented him with the Humanitarian Award, which was a candelabra, which we call a menorah. And when the Pope saw it, he said, a menorah. I mean, you know, which is the Hebrew word for candelabra. He was sensitive as to how to communicate and how to, you know, move across the divide as a humanitarian. And that's really who he is.
Rabbi Marvin Hier, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up next, how the 50 million Roman Catholics in the United States are taking the news about Pope John Paul II as the faithful in Chicago pray for him tonight.
Advanced engineering, our most luxurious appointments are all found behind one grill. The Denali Line by GMC. Introducing Ortho Weed Be Gone Max. So revolutionary, it targets and kills the toughest weeds without harming your lawn. Weed Be Gone Max sprayed here. Ordinary weed killer here. Only Weed Be Gone Max has a foaming action and weed targeting formula for total root kill. So it killed the weeds, but not the grass. The ordinary weed killer didn't target anything, so it killed everything. New Ortho Weed Be Gone Max. Kills weeds, not lawns. Guaranteed.
If you decide to quit smoking, you're not alone. Quitting is hard, but millions of people have succeeded. To help you find your own way, get a free copy of the Quit Assist Resource Guide. It points the way to expert quitting information, websites, guides, quit lines, what has worked for others, and more. It could help you find your own path to success. Quit Assist, a free resource from Philip Morris USA. Call or log on.
Say your prize stallion has a hot date with that special someone, but he's not looking his best right now. Out here, it takes more than a good bloodline to make a horse look good. You have that trailer home by midnight now.
And while we continue to wait for any word about the Pope's condition at this hour, let's check in with Larry King to find out what is coming up at the top of the hour. Hi, Larry.
Hi, Paula. We've got a heck of an hour coming. A lot of guests, including James Caviezel, who played Jesus in Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. The famed Sister Helen Prozon, who wrote Dead Man Walking. We'll be hearing from the former First Lady Nancy Reagan, checking in with people in the Vatican, in Rome, cardinals around the United States, as we focus in on these last hours in the Vatican. Paula, and we'll see you again at the, you're going to do Newsnight tonight, right?
Double duty tonight, 10 to 12. Thanks, Larry.
You can go around me anytime.
Larry. All right, we'll see you at 9 and 9 o'clock.
Okay.
Thank you. As we've talked about earlier this evening, about 50 million Roman Catholics live in the United States. They, too, are praying for Pope John Paul II. Chris Lawrence is at St. Hyacinth Church in Chicago. Adora Udoji with us from St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. Let's start with Adora right now. Adora, what's going on there?
Good evening, Paula. Given the perilous condition of Pope John Paul II, we've seen many people coming in and out of St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is right behind us here. Of course, going in to pray for the Pope, to light candles, to send him good wishes. Paula, we met people from all over, from Canada, Texas, Ohio, and of course, some New Yorkers here like Alan Prezidowski, who's actually Adam Prezidowski, excuse me, who actually, this was your first trip here.
That's right.
To the church, but you felt compelled to come.
Yes.
What was so special about this Pope? How did he touch your life?
Well, I thought he was a great man of peace that basically spent his life in the pursuit of peace and in the pursuit of life, and I wanted to show my respects, pray for him, pray for his comfort, and if need be, his quick passage.
When you were thinking about it today, because clearly you must have been watching some of the news coverage, what do you think his legacy would be?
Well, I think, once again, I think it's really about peace. I think
bestseller Dead Man Walking, which was made into one of the best movies ever made, I think. Her newest book is The Death of Innocents, an eyewitness account of wrongful executions. The Pope has many contradictory qualities, sister. He is very conservative in the church, very liberal socially with regard to rich nations, poor nations, and with regard to capital punishment, a staunch opponent. I gather that brings you even closer to him, right?
Yes, I'm thinking very much of him right now, Larry, because so many times I would appeal to him in the case of someone about to be executed. But the thing that I'm most grateful to the Pope for is that he really took the teaching of the Catholic Church and changed it into principled opposition against the death penalty, so that there are no exceptions, which he made clear when he came to St. Louis in '99, saying even those who have done terrible crimes have a dignity that must not be taken from them. And I was very happy that providentially I got a chance to have a direct dialogue with him about this issue, because in his encyclical, The Gospel of Life, he had left a big loophole, and I said, Your Holiness, your words, if you say the state can execute in cases of absolute necessity, your words are going to be quoted for death. And I urged him to close the loophole, which he did by changing the catechism. So I have nothing but gratitude for him in the way he helped the church come to principled opposition against the death penalty.
Did he ever talk any leaders, to your knowledge, out of executing?
Well, when he was in St. Louis, actually, with the governor, a man who was about to be executed, he talked him out of that execution and did save the life of that one individual. What's even more important, though, than intervening for individuals was to change the teaching of the church. See, the traditional 1600-year teaching of the church was that the state had the right to take life for grave or grievous crimes in order to defend society. Well, in his encyclical, The Gospel of Life in '95, the Pope pushed the death penalty to the edge, saying modern societies have a way to defend ourselves without executing. But then what he did was he cut out of the catechism the criteria for a grave, extremely grave crimes, to remove that as the criteria on which the death penalty is based.
Delia Gallagher is at the Vatican. She's managing editor of Inside the Vatican, CNN Vatican analyst, been reporting for us all day. How does this work now? Do they issue any kind of releases at various times? What happens?
Well, Larry, in fact, over the past few days, we've been surprised at the amount of information that has been released already on the Pope's health. And at this stage, frankly, we expect that the next release will be the final one. The press office is open. The Pope's spokesman is on hand. But we don't expect that there will be any more official news on the Pope's health until the final bulletin. Larry?
Do you know, Delia, if doctors are around him? Who's with him now? Where is he now? Who's with him?
Well, he is in his papal apartments, presumably. That's not been confirmed. The Vatican hasn't confirmed exactly where he is or who is with him, but I can conjecture that he is in his papal apartments because the Pope himself didn't want to return to the hospital. He asked to stay at the Vatican. With him surely is his personal secretary, Don Stanislaw Dziwisz, who has been by his side for 40 years, even before he became Pope. He is a Polish man and was helping the Pope as his personal secretary in Krakow. There are also several Polish aides there and some Polish nuns who are in charge of running the household. So that is his core group. I don't think at this time that the cardinals are visiting him. We do know that earlier he received visits from the Secretary of State, from Cardinal Ratzinger, and from an American cardinal, Cardinal Sciocca, who is the governor of the Vatican City State. So he saw some of his top Curia cardinals this morning. However, I think at this moment, as we saw with his hospital stays, the cardinals tend to stay away. They like to give the Pope his privacy. And so I assume that aside from his personal aides and the doctors, those are all the people that are in the room at this moment. Larry?
Thanks, Delia. We'll be back with more on this edition of Larry King Live. A reminder, we will have live editions of this program Saturday and Sunday night as well. We'll be right back.
Larry King Live is brought to you by ArcaX, the world's largest fully electronic stock exchange, and by your local Lincoln Mercury dealer, who invites you to come and see the full line of Lincolns and Mercurys today.
ArcaX, the world's largest fully electronic stock exchange.
The 2005 Mercury Montego. Lots of versatility, lots of room. Better load up on quarters.
There's a place for us. Somewhere, a place for us. Peace and quiet and
For those in the academic, medical, and cultural fields whose work serves the greater good, we serve you. TIAA-CREF, Financial Services for the greater good.
She's doing justice to legal news.
I'm Nancy Grace, and I'm locked and loaded.
Nancy Grace, Monday on Headline News Prime.
It's the Vatican, about 12 minutes after 4 in the morning. There'll be no tape programming later tonight. Sometimes most of the times we repeat this program, but CNN International will be taking over later to carry you, so anything you see on CNN will be live as it happens. Joining us from Rome is Jeff Israeli, Time Magazine's Rome bureau chief. This Pope has so many facets. How, Jeff, will he be remembered?
Oh, well, I think he'll be remembered substantially in two basic ways. As a man who, first of all, within the church, he redefined the papacy. He brought the papacy out to the people, traveled the world, 100 papal trips, went to the farthest corners of the earth, and made the papacy a missionary job as well as the administrative leader of the church. And of course, he'll also be remembered as a world leader who helped bring about the fall of communism, who spoke out about injustice, who soon after helping to bring about the fall of communism, criticized the excesses of capitalism, someone with a real ear for global issues as well.
A socialist at heart, right, Jeff, politically?
I don't think he would use that word, but he certainly his heart was with the poor, with the disadvantaged, with those who needed a hand up. But his heart was in many places, many issues. He's talked about the doctrine of life, and life in terms of what we would call social issues, abortion, euthanasia, would be considered a conservative. But life in other issues means helping poor people.
CNBC's special report continues.
Afternoon. Well, it's been a little fun.
2 p.m. shopping trip to local orphanage. Curse me a pharaoh for cherry picking all the good stuff.
We're fairs all over the continent.
Are you ready? Flight 67 to sleeping in your own bed for a change. Enjoy your flight.
And remember to book your travel at AA.com, where you always get our lowest fares, guaranteed. We know why you fly.
Figure of our modern age who came close to him in public acclaim. He bridged the gap between all religions, and the people just loved him because of the kind of person he was.
But I think it's fair to say that there are tensions, even some suspicions often between evangelicals and Catholics. How was this Pope able to break down some of those barriers?
Well, his word reflected some of the deepest feelings that the evangelicals had. He was a profound believer in God and a profound believer in Jesus Christ and in the Bible and in the principles and teachings that we all hold as Christians. He upheld moral standards. I was so grateful, frankly, along the way to see his forthright stand on many issues that I personally hold dear. And, you know, I'm a Southern Baptist, and you'd think that there'd be tension, but in truth, it wasn't. And I have seen a drawing together because of this Pope. I think he and some of his predecessors have brought a rapprochement, if I can use that term, between Protestants and Catholics that has been very remarkable. He bridged the gap between us, and we'll miss him. It'll be a great blow to all of us to see his passing.
Fair to call Pope John Paul one of the great evangelists in religious history?
I don't think there's any question. I heard you say earlier the number of trips he made. He was just indefatigable. I don't see how he stood it. I saw what they did in New York. I was in the consistory when he said Mass in Central Park, and it was a light drizzle falling. He was out in the middle of that, and then he had a schedule that would have killed a person half his age and fatigued him, and he just kept going like a trooper. But he went to continent after continent, and huge crowds came out for him. So the Catholic Church I don't think has ever had anybody like him.
Let's go back to what you were saying earlier about the Pope's traditionalist image. Some Catholics found him too conservative, especially on issues such as birth control or the role of women in the church. I found him out of step with the modern world, and yet wasn't part of the appeal to evangelicals like yourself his orthodoxy, the fact that he was old-fashioned, if you will?
Well, we see many of the traditions of the church slipping away. We see people cutting corners on morality. We see things that frankly are appalling taking place in our society. And this man stood like a rock. Yes, that's one of his appeals, but the amazing thing about him was he appealed to young people. We think that young people would be put off by somebody who was a more traditionalist, but they flocked to him. Remember they used to chant, I think he was in South Carolina, it was John Paul II, we love you, and it went on and on and on. These were kids, college students talking to him.
You know, it's interesting, we were talking with Fred Barnes on Special Report today, and he quoted Richard Land, who at one point said, "This guy knows how to pope." I mean, from one preacher to another, did you just admire his skills?
There's no question about it. But I think it was genuine. Again, I was in one of those audiences over in the Vatican.
Half as much again, if not more. That's really the difference between Palm Beach and Scottsdale, just the quality of the car in its final finish.
Saw Amy bowing down. Apparently her guys bowed out.
Leaving about 50,000, leaving about 51,000, going twice. Third and final count. So, $50,000.
And a 1956 Chevy Corvette convertible has just bounced its way into our top five, actually tied its way into the top five. As one of the top five sellers of cars that we have seen in the Barrett-Jackson auction so far this weekend, our Speed Channel coverage. We're going to take a break, but we'll be back.
Monday, inside Nextel Cup. Off.
Difficulty of replacing him, and think of the loss we'll all feel. It's very sad. But for him, I grieved at him. He would be out there trying to speak and trying to bring a blessing, trying to say Mass and to go through his duties, and he was obviously so terribly infirmed. He had Parkinson's. He had these other maladies that were afflicting him, and you suffer with him. And I mean, the Lord has a wonderful reward for people like that, and I think he deserves his eternal rest. He's worked very hard, and he deserves the very best that can come to him. So it's part of a celebration for one who's going home, but at the same time, yes, we're very sad.
Pat Robertson, we want to thank you so much for joining us tonight and for sharing your very special insight.
Thanks, Chris.
We're continuing our special coverage of Pope John Paul II's fight for life. Coming up next, we'll discuss this Pope's legacy, both for the Catholic Church and the rest of the world. And we'll take you step by step through what happens after the Pope dies. Stay tuned.
Came to the office confident that he knew how to be a bishop in the modern world,
confident in the message of the church and the capacity of that message to rally people to a defense of their own dignity and freedom.
George, you know, he also reached out not only across divisions in the Catholic Church, but also divisions in America and across the world. I mean, I can tell you personally, I grew up in the Southeast, and we didn't know an awful lot about Catholics, or at least not as much about Catholics as we did about the Southern Baptists or Methodists or other Protestant denominations. But this is a pope that, again, somehow spoke to all of us. I'm curious.